So picking up kind of exactly there, let's just see if we can kind of go into this hyphen place and really kind of feel into it on kind of three levels again, just to kind of create some grist for the mill. And I want to specifically go into kind of the places where we overlap, because that's really the profound place, and then the slight places of distinction, which we'll just kind of clarify. That's where the excitement is. So when we talk about wounds, I think what we're kind of generally agreeing on, but correct me if I don't want to be the rewriter here, taking the editorial position, is that although we're going to use the word wound because in using the word wound, we're honoring it. We're honoring the wound that it needs to be healed. But that wound at its core, right, comes from a rupture in connection, right, a disconnection, and that disconnection itself is, if it remains in play, it's tragic.
Yes.
But that it happens is not tragic. And that's the distinction I want to draw. Right? If I can use like a Kabbalistic framework for a second. Right? In Kabbalah, you have the original emanation of light. The light emanates into vessels, 10 vessels. And then the vessels shatter, called the shattering of the vessels. Now, the shattering of the vessels is before human beings existed. And the vessels shatter because they're not in right relationship to each other. Now, there's no human beings. This is part of the kind of primordial, Kabbalistic picture of the world. So that there should be wrong relationship or a rupture in connection or a shattering of the vessels, right, is not because, divinity was having a bad day, but because that is the ontology, if you will, if I can use that word, meaning that's the intentional plan, right? The nature of reality is that there is this emanation of light, right, a wholeness. There's then a shattering of the vessels. Then in the beautiful imagery of the Kabbalah, the vessels then scatter to all parts of the world. And in each vessel, each shard, broken vessel, there's a point of light. And the job of the human being is to liberate the light from the broken vessels. So we live in a world of broken vessels and broken hearts. Right? We live in a world of outrageous pain. Right? And what we want to do is we want to liberate the light, meaning reestablish the connection. The vessel becomes whole again. The light returns to source, right, and connectivity is reestablished. So the tragedy is if we get, if we can borrow that, term, arrested development. If we arrest development in the place of rupture, that's tragic. But that the rupture takes place isn't tragic. That's actually what's supposed to happen. Happens to everybody, as you said. No adult, right, actually reaches adulthood without some measure, right, of rupture, right? So, people think like, if only I had that ideal set of parents who are in New Jersey someplace, we don't know where they live, who were having ideal sex and there was no shame and everything happened perfectly and I was fully received, but that mythic couple doesn't exist, even in New Jersey, right? They don't, right? So we all go through that process. So if we would actually reframe our terminology, right, in a way that we actually understood that the wound or the disconnection or the rupture isn't tragic, right? It's the necessary ontology of reality. That actually makes the whole process a lot more exciting and actually invigorating. We're in this holy, gorgeous, stunning unfolding in which we're born whole, we fall away, there's disconnection. That happens to every single being on the face of the planet, right? And then the great journey is to establish connection. But that actually makes one huge shift. That means instead of having a pathological planet filled with people, we have a healthy planet filled with people, and part of health is, and here's the kind of audacious move, kind of health is rupture, right? And if you're born whole, you rupture, right? That's always going to be true. We're always going to be exiled from Eden, right? And we're always going to have to find our way back from Eden. And the exile from Eden wasn't a sin or a tragedy. It was the natural process of becoming human. So I would just kind of put that kind of in the space because I just think that there's something in the original disconnection conversation or the original rupture conversation, or the original wound conversation, that if we could reframe the narrative, right, changing the narrative matters. Right? The narrative is everything. What's the story we're telling? We live in, what's that famous phrase from Charles Taylor, wrote this great book called Sources of Self that we might have all happened upon one time or another. And he opens the book by saying, we all live in inescapable frameworks. And what a great, that sentence just kind of like, and if our framework is a tragic framework, right, then that's one framework. If our framework is the necessary rupture, the necessary disconnection, so that we get to earn it. We get to earn our way back. We get to claim our way back. We get to realize it ourselves. And maybe the last sentence is in this kind of initial foray. There's a phrase in Kabbalah in the 16th century in Italy called lachma de kisufa in Aramaic, which is the bread of shame, right? That if we were never ruptured, we would never earn it. We'd never earn the connection, right? It would just be given to us, and it would be like a farmer who never had to go through the process of making this beautiful meal. He never planted, and he never sowed, and he never reaped. He just got a beautiful meal, and the meal tastes okay. But if actually he went through this entire long, gorgeous process of, planting and reaping and sowing, and then he kind of, made the bread and then he served the meal, it's delicious, right? Because he participated in it. So I want to kind of suggest this kind of, this core sense that this is the way it's supposed to be, and maybe if we can go biblical, for a moment, which just, biblical again in the biblical mystical sense, in its best and the most gorgeous sense of biblical. And I just want to stand a little bit for a moment for biblical. In a world, I'm madly in love with the Buddha and Mahayana and Vajrayana and Dokchen and it's a gorgeous world that we've all, come to appreciate in America. And it has an enormous amount to say. And there's kind of core biblical resonance, core biblical mysticism that actually is native, right? That we need to kind of reclaim and evolve and kind of loosen it from its kind of, fundamentalist grips. So in that original biblical story, and God saw that it was good, 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 chapter 1. And then all of the it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, in this literary gorgeous move, chapter 2, lo tov, it's not good. So all of the it was good becomes not good. It's not good for the human being to be levado, alone. It's actually only twice in the entire biblical canon, and one's a reframe of the first, is you've got this ontological statement. You used the word ontology during the break, Harville. This ontology of it's not good. All of the good of the entire creative process is not good if the human being is ruptured in connection, is levado, is lonely. And so the entire process becomes recovering, right, the original connection. But and here's the gorgeous thing. The gorgeous thing, though, is it's not a tragedy that it happened that way. That's what the biblical narrative is trying to say, and that's what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to fall away. And so I want to just to introduce that. And there's one more major point I wanted to bring to bear, but I got this feeling that it's just time to stop talking, right? So let me just kind of put that on the table and bracket the other point and come back and just open it up to, does that make sense in terms of a re-narration? Mm-hmm. A re-narration of the story. Sure.
I'd love Harville to really unpack connection and the ontology of connection, but as a segue, just to say how much I appreciate the reframing of the wound, because I know in the English language it's interesting that the play of the words, that a wound creates a hole, a rupture. There's a hole, and we have a shame around this hole, so we hide it from others. But the hole is how, it's our holes through which we connect. Like that's how connection happens, when we become vulnerable and expose our holes to each other. And in that sense, the whole becomes holy. And it's through our holiness and our connection of our holes that we become whole, W-H-O-L-E. Right. It's curious that these words are so friendly, that mean such different things, but it's part of what shows the unpacking of any one thing probably has its opposite embedded in it, but certainly around the wounding. And I think one of the things Imago has done is tried to normalize the fact, we just all, our presentational selves are just so intact, like we got our act together and we figured it out, and that's how we're expected to succeed in life, is be on top of things. But it's our brokenness and our vulnerability that's our greatest asset to our humanity. And so I think the couple other things I'd tag on is just that the curiosity of pain being a part of love and sorrow being a part of love, that we don't want that. We want love to be joy, but we have an aversion to thinking about pain and sorrow as part of love. But I think it's just an inextricably linked thing, that sorrow and love. I know at the foot of the cross, sorrow and love flows mingled down,
Right.
is the song about the blood at the cross. And a heart broke open, you know,
Yeah.
to love the whole world. And it was a breaking in order to open.
Yeah.
But the last thing I'll say is that I think if there was one message we would want to give out, we would emphasize that people are born in relationship, they are wounded in relationship,
Yeah.
and they are healed only in relationship. That we posit that the only true healing is relational healing. And it's poignant for us that people race off and find a guru and go sit on a mountaintop and they, you know, meditate for a month and they go, I want to be healed, I want to be healed. And who is it that wrote the book, After the Ecstasy Comes the Laundry?
Right.
That, you know,
Kornfeld.
Yeah, Jack Kornfeld. So it's like living with people, that healing by yourself, the rubber hits the road when you're back in your relationships.
Yeah,
And so we really sort of, it has a place doing your personal healing on your own, but nothing beats healing in relationship.
Yeah. Amen.
Hey,
Amen, sister.
cool.
Preach it, preach it.
That's awesome.
And you've been actually the leader more than you say and think to languaging that and talking about that in terms of the space between.
The hyphen, as you
The
say.
hyphen,
the hyphen.
And
Yeah.
you love talking about the hyphen.
Yeah, and you know, a Buber, it may be an apocryphal story because which I heard, I actually can't find it, is that when he came to America and the book was published here, everybody was talking about the I and the thou.
Yeah.
And he said, it's not about the I and das ich and das, well, I don't know what thou is.
Right.
It's about das hyphen.
That's awesome.
Then he wrote another book called Between Man and Man in
Right.
order to explain the hyphen.
Right.
That was even more unintelligible.
Right.
But the point was that he got it. He saw that
Yeah, he got it.
it was the relationship and that came at a time when the individual was king in relationship, and all that was sort of not only soft but even maybe pathological, you know, codependency, and you needed relationships and so forth. So, what I want to response also to what you were saying, and I know I'm going to diverge from all of you with what I'm going to say, but I have an intellectual
I know what he's going to say.
and a visceral objection to that whole mythology.
Awesome. Let's do it.
But I want to start at the clinical level
Please.
and then go to the theoretical level. I'll try to do both of them quickly. That Helen and I arrived in our conversations at a transpsychological hypothesis that what people want is they want their true nature. They want themselves, which is connection. That's what they want, and that's not a psychological experience. That's an ontology. I want to be what I am.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And when I'm not that, then I feel anxious, and therefore all of my symptomatology is an attempt to regulate my anxiety about the fact that when I'm not me, I might not be at all. It's
Right.
sort of a Tillichian thing. It's
Right.
not the fear of death that bothers me. It's the fear of non-being,
Right.
that he said. I remember there's some sentences that you hear your mentor say, and it's like, he wasn't even making that point in the lecture,
Right.
but that was the one that I got, and I'm aware that that's a part of me too. It's like, I don't care if the molecules come back to being and they have no imprint of me. I'm not even interested in the story. I want to know whether or not I'm going to show up again.
Right.
So that's one point. The other is as we got clear
That's
that
not
we
yet
were,
the disagreement. So far, we're together.
yeah, so far we're together.
Okay.
Right, I'm going to get to the disagreement
Okay.
in a minute. And we're still together on this, is that when when we got clear that we were into ontology, and psychology is what you do when ontology is ruptured, when you're not any longer present to what we are, and you can't be if you're anxious, because then you go into the singular self and defend yourself and become isolated. Then you have symptoms, and then you have to go get help or take drugs or something in order to regulate the pain of the anxiety. So when we got that clear, we began to change the therapeutic interview, which was to train Imago therapists that when they sit in front of a couple, that the way they look at the couple determines how useful they will be to the couple.
Beautiful.
And if they diagnose them in any of the medical categories of the DSM now 5 and 4s and 3s, back in, I'm old enough to remember all of those, they have then objectified the couple, and they will not be able to help the couple because they see them as a disease that they're going to treat and therefore cure. But if they can see that this couple is sitting here and their connection, their experience of felt connection has been ruptured, and they've been doing everything they can to repair that, and everything they've done has made it worse. That then what they know is all they have to do is help them restore connection. And then the dialogue process, which is our only intervention, is you help train them in a conversation where they become equal rather than vertical. One knows that's a monologue, but you go into dialogue. And that conversation regulates the anxiety so that you then begin to feel, and then you connect. And then when you have that connection and you sustain that, you return to the romantic stage, because the romance was about our essence. It wasn't a pathological state. It was a taste of the elixir of being. When you get that back, but very few couples can sustain it without practicing it for a long time, which is now why we're going into the focus on zero negativity. Will help you regulate that better than a few more sessions or some other theory or analysis. That's the goal, zero negativity. So practice it now. So that's the connection piece. And when I saw the still face film, I realized that baby comes with that. It doesn't come with a self. It comes with an experience of connection. And when that's ruptured, then it goes into anxiety. Then it becomes a self, a defended self, in my language. So I think that it is a tragedy when that mother turned away. That was tragic because that baby lost its essence. It lost connection to its essence, and that's tragic. And my theology and my psychology is, I don't get it. Yes, I can understand why it's important and necessary. It happens to everybody. Why it's important, it does happen to everybody, and why we have to understand it happens to everybody. And we have to normalize it so that you don't feel different if you have a rupture, and we have to work out technologies of reconnection. But I don't get it, why that's the case. And so the Western world has used the second story of creation, and then in which man was lonely, and therefore God made him a companion. But the first story of creation, man was not lonely. Male and female were made simultaneously, side by side, and they were connected. This garden was put there with these perfect human beings, or with these male and female, with a tree for the knowledge of good and evil. And you can imagine if it was a garden, it must have had corn in it and some other things to eat. And it was tragic that the relationship ruptured that relationship to original space. But it appears to me that the story began the way it should be, and that the tragedy, that it is a tragedy, that paradisical thing got ruptured. And so the glorification of suffering and of repair, to me, has always been objectionable. It's like it's a tragic necessity that we repair, but it is not something to be glorified. It's not something to say is the gift. It's not a gift. It's a tragedy. This baby lost something, And it's not necessary that this baby lose something. It's just that millions of years, human beings have not evolved to the point that they can sustain connection. So the journey is that we become aware of and able to sustain what we are, which is connection. And then at that point, I mean, every human being yearns for a heaven. I mean, not every human being, but those of us in the worlds we know most about. That something good, something non-tragic, something connectional, something, some garden is going to be somewhere. So the human desire is to live without rupture, but to live in the joy and the bliss of being with. And so it is a tragedy to me that is lost. And I do feel empathy for me and for all of humankind, because we're in this amazing, tragic situation, which we're trying to repair, and which Helen and I are giving our lives to do. We think the zero negativity challenge we're going to launch globally is an attempt to recover Eden. Because if you could imagine living in a world without negativity, just imagine that, then you would live in the bliss of being. Negativity objectifies people. You become non-self when you're negated, or when you're criticized, when you're put down. Imagine all of the Edenic experience, and I realize this is idealized, and it's probably can never come into being, but I want it to come into being. That's why I'm here at 77, still working on how do you simplify an intervention that could in fact impact the whole human race. Everybody can understand zero negativity. You don't have to give them a long extension. When they say, would you like to live in a zero negativity space? Yeah! And they know what you mean. It's like, I wouldn't have this bitch, talking to me, or I wouldn't have a boss yelling at me. I would live in the peace and the bliss of being without judgment, condemnation, and so forth. So I just always, and Helen, this is one of the places where we have our most intense conversations, is that Helen talks about the joy of suffering. Even it's like, you got to be kidding! The joy of suffering. I have no joy in suffering. When we rupture our connection because I do something stupid, I'm the most miserable human being on the planet. And I used to go off and lick my wounds for 2 or 3 weeks, and finally come tracking back. Now I go in about 3 to 5 minutes and say, Helen, can we talk? Can we talk? Can we have a dialogue? Can I hug you? Let me bring you something. I don't want the being with, that sense of connection. When I'm there, I know I'm in my reality. It's not a psychologically healthy place. It's ontologically us. And when I'm out of that, I'm out of essence, to use your term, and I want to be in essence. And so that's my visceral reaction to this whole tradition. And my cognitive objection, and the objection to the use of the second story as a way to explain human beings. It's the first story, and it got rewritten by a bunch of Jewish, well, I guess they weren't even Jewish at the time, but scholars who rewrote the story. I think about 1,000 years later.
On behalf of the Jewish scholars, right? So I think
I know you'll have a great response to this. I can't wait to hear it.
It's a great conversation. I mean, it's a great, and it's I mean, on some deep level, we of course totally agree, right? And
about connection.
And, right, that's right. So first,
absolutely.
So first off, totally love you.
Yes, I love you too.
So we're totally good. Right, we're so good. Right, and I love this conversation.
I'm going to take notes.
Right, and
I love this.
So let's try and kind of find it here together. So what we both totally agree, right, and deeply feel is just the utter tragedy of human pain.
Yes.
So that's where we,
absolutely.
And I want to really kind of come together. And I also don't want you to intellectually flank me on the side of not feeling the tragedy of human pain. So I want to make sure to kind of claim that space.
I get that. I get that. The tragedy of human pain.
But actually, that's I'm a child of Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
Right. And so I grew up in the shadow of intensities of pain, and what moves Lori and I in the world, and what moves you and Helen is here the same, right? And that's, what do we do to heal the pain? Mm-hmm. And so from there, we're kind of, and at the same time, and let me go to the next step, and there's no glorification of pain. So I want to kind of be with you in that as well. In other words, the glorification of pain is problematic on a lot of levels, right? So clearly where we want to go, right, is to this place which is Edenic. You know, we want to be in Eden, right? And especially when we talk about the baby, right? We're just going to keep going, guys, right? When we talk about the baby, and we talk about the baby's, you know, moment of losing essence, that's a tragic moment. I mean, how can that not be a tragic moment, right?
So we agree on that.
Right.
Yes.
So, I mean, how can it not be?
Yeah.
Right. And here's the big and. You know, and maybe we will stop for a second.